Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this special edition of Manufacturing TV's Kaizen Central. Those of you who are regulars know that we meet every month to talk about manufacturing and issues around it. And a very warm welcome to this special. That I said I was going to make a mistake, and I made a mistake just there, but never mind. It is all resolved, and I just want to welcome you all. This is a very exciting opportunity for us. As you know, we held the debates with Lee Rowley, always get it wrong, and Jonathan Reynolds, and they were published earlier this week, talking about the future of industrial policy. And we're here tonight to talk about some of the issues arising, given that we're at an extraordinarily difficult time in manufacturing's history. Not manufacturing's fault, it is just the economic picture has gone very, very strange and bizarre in the last 2 years. And of course, Ukraine has just compounded this. And we want to discuss to what extent manufacturing is going to need a great deal of support to get through this, or not. There are arguments both ways. A bit of housekeeping. I want this to be a conversation. I don't want it to be like a panel discussion. We've got some wonderful guests here tonight, and Siemens Cable is just joining us now, and I think he's coming from Dubai, so that is quite late over there in the evening. So yes, if I can introduce some of our guests. We've got, as I say, Siemens Cable. Good evening to you, sir. Tim Minshall from the Institute for Manufacturing at Cambridge. Katherine Bennett, who's CEO of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. Great to see you, Katherine. Will Hutton, economics commentator, who's joining us from Italy. And I must say, this is fantastic to have such a distinguished panel of guests with us tonight. I suppose what I was saying earlier about the sector being at a stage of flux, really. I mean, the sector's got a great deal to be proud of, but the critical thing is there are many areas where it's not keeping up with competitors overseas in terms of productivity, investment, skills. I could go on. The question that underlaid the debates really was, to what extent does government have a responsibility or a role to resolve any of that? Now, if you've read the summaries or seen the videos, obviously Lee Rowley and Jonathan Reynolds had different opinions on a lot of things. But what I thought was quite interesting was the extent to which Lee Rowley, who is very much what I would describe as a free market, small state conservative, he was sort of pushing the government line, which is to keep up the levels of support that are existing at the moment. But the big questions really were about, to what extent are they working? What more do we need to do? The first person I'm going to call on tonight is another distinguished guest, Verity Davidge, who's policy director at Make UK, and was with me on both the panel discussions. Verity, I wonder if I can ask you just to unpick that, what you saw as being the critical differences between what the two politicians had to say to us.
I think you're always going to get quite differences when you've got, the person in government and the opposition, which gives you a little bit more opportunity to kind of push and challenge. I think what I took away was really both of their commitments to the manufacturing sector. Actually, I found that their knowledge of the sector was really good. They seemed very passionate about it. I think for me, for the minister, he still wasn't quite as committal in terms of that long-term strategy, not just what he could commit to as a government minister, but I think a lot of the things we were talking about, investment in capital equipment, moving to net zero, investment in people, for our sector still needs to be long-term. And I think we would have wanted to see a bit more of that from him. I think from Jonathan Reynolds, it was great to see that, very definite we will get cross-party buy-in for a long-term plan. Of course, we need to see in practice if that was to happen, if we saw a future Labour government. But overall, you know, I think that we saw some great messages, some great nods to our sector, and really a way forward and a potential plan to work both with this current government and perhaps a future Labour government too.
So Vince, good evening to you. And I'm not certain if you're in Dubai or not, but if you are, thank you very much for coming on so late in the evening.
No, I'm actually in the UK. The event in Dubai has been postponed. But anyway, thank you for keeping the event going.
Well, I wonder if I could ask you, I mean, obviously you were business secretary in the coalition government. And I'm wondering if you can just identify any of the tensions that you experienced between your philosophy as a Liberal Democrat and what you felt the business sector, and of course we're talking about manufacturing here tonight, and any tensions between the Conservative government, which, as we know, has been very much Treasury driven in terms of on not wishing to spend money where they can avoid it.
Well, there was a certain amount of tension, but they were reconciled. Indeed, we launched an industrial strategy 2011-12, which I think the sector and individual, not just manufacturing, but other sectors benefited from. The problem with the UK, I think, is this terrible constant urge to reinvent the wheel. You know, we have alternating governments, fairly long periods. Different ministers come in and they have a different agenda, want to start everything afresh. I mean, if you just review the last 20 odd years, we had the embryo of an industrial strategy before I came into office. Peter Mandelson had done quite a lot of very good initiatives. The coalition came in determined to tear it all up. It became obvious that that wasn't sensible. And I got us back into the, things like the Automotive Council, the aerospace industry, and we broadened it out to other sectors. That lasted till the end of 2015. A new Secretary of State came in who didn't believe it and started tearing it up. He was then succeeded by a Conservative who wanted to retain all the good stuff we'd done. And then he left and another minister came in who wanted to tear it all up again. So we've had this constant stop-start in sectors where people are having to make 20, 30, 40-year investment decisions. I mean, it's absolutely impossible. In terms of the specific areas of government intervention, I sort of broke them down into three. I mean, one is creating a system which is sympathetic to innovation. And I think actually that's the bit that has stuck best. We launched the Catapult network. It has survived. It actually had friends in the Treasury. I was pleasantly surprised. And it's changed, but it's still there. And I think it's been built upon. So if you like, the innovation ecosystem is intact. The human capital side, training, is we've probably gone backwards. We launched major initiatives to try and revitalize apprenticeships, but then this was knocked sideways by the apprenticeship levy. That whole system of long-term treatment to training has effectively evaporated. The recent figures are awful. So that's one element of industrial strategy that has gone backwards. And then thirdly, there's financing, and they set up institutions. Investment bank, the first one has survived and was important in the pandemic.
So people here.
Yeah, Vince.
A very good example of this constant stop-start, which is effectively bedeviling our whole approach to this problem.
I think it's quite interesting that I think I've lost count of how many business secretaries we've had in the last few years. I think it's 4 in the last 4 years. I mean, consistency is just not there. I wonder if I could turn to Tim. Tim, I talked about these seismic changes going on in the world in the last 2 years. There's a kind of reset underway, perhaps making more things here. We've got the net zero strategy, which is going to drive changes in the way manufacturing operates. What do you think are the issues that manufacturers are going to have to gear up to face in the next year or so?
Oh, thank you for that. I think there are others here better able to respond to some of those, but if I have a quick stab at a couple of comments, I think it's been extraordinary, the lessons learned from the last couple of years about as you've identified, the massive strengths of the UK manufacturing sector, but also how fragile elements were of it as well. And I think, and this is a message that many have repeated elsewhere, I'm not adding nothing new here, but that sense of we've had a shock. There is also a massive existential shock sitting there, that of sustainability. What have we actually learned to do things differently to ensure we're better able to survive? I'm not sure how much has been learned so far. Clearly great things happened. What do we take away from that? What stops us reverting back to where we were before? That's one concern. And another point I think picks up on comments made earlier, which is this from the two previous discussants in the two previous events, the commonalities around a need for long-term planning, a need for integration of activities, and a need to focus on the workforce. Those have just been made even more true by what we've experienced in the last 2 years. But I think the frustration for everybody on the policy side, on the manufacturing side, across everything is, how do we ensure that what we've seen happen leads to some positive outcomes to help us address those three very specific needs, which haven't changed, I don't think, for the last 20 or 30 years.
Thank you. There's lots there that we'll come back to, and this is a conversation, as I say, not a panel discussion, but I do want to put some points to our guests. Will Hutton, I was intrigued and have been intrigued for a long time at the fact that this government, most notably, sees that the way to resolve trade imbalances, and we know we have a worrying trade imbalance at the moment, our exports are falling compared with our competitors, and that the way to resolve that is just to get more foreign direct investment in. I think it was Genesis in the 70s, their album Selling England by the Pound, and it just feels sometimes like that is what they see that as the panacea. Lee Rowley actually even said that during the debate, he said, we have companies coming here to invest. We're seeing almost on a weekly and monthly basis, we're getting that foreign direct investment into our manufacturing base. But what it means is it's no longer British. I wonder, what are your thoughts? Have you ever thought about that and why there is this near obsession with FDI?
Gosh, where to begin on this? I mean, I feel very strongly that for too long, this catch line, which I mean, all governments are slightly prey to, but particularly conservative governments, that when X multinational wants to buy a jewel in the crown, where the cry goes up, we're open for business. And I think one has to disentangle, foreign direct investment where people are really building, greenfield sites. So, EDF Energy are building a nuclear plant at Hinkley Point. I mean, that's absolutely great. SoftBank buying Arm, with all the consequences for that, for British semiconductor presence, and now actually what's happening with our semiconductor factory in Newport. It's a different story. And I've never, the foreign direct investment figures don't disaggregate, of course, what's XYZ multinational buying a jewel in the crown. And once it's gone, that becomes a kind of ownership confers the strategic decision-making kind of then lies outside the UK. And that's fundamentally important. It doesn't disaggregate it. So, but even the gross numbers, which are undisaggregated since Brexit, are extraordinarily alarming. I was actually quite shocked that no one picked up Lee Rowley's outrageous claim. I mean, in 2019, 2020, now 2021, according to EY, for the first time since the mid-60s, I mean, the French have got more foreign direct investment than we have. So one of the consequences of Brexit actually is that these numbers are kind of really heading south, and he shouldn't be allowed to make claims which are literally untrue, actually. It's not true that the scale of inward direct investment is running at the levels it was pre-Brexit. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is one has to be careful about what's good and what's bad in foreign direct investment. There are many industries where there is no longer building materials is one, where, and actually alarmingly, elements in the defence contracting supply chain is another, where actually there is no UK owner. And I mean, I'm a non-executive director on the satellite applications Catapult, which Vince spoke about as part of the innovation ecosystem, and actually trying to kind of, and one wants to be part of a kind of a scale-up system. But what's notable is that actually in so many sectors, there's not the kind of big kind of national player around which one could kind of consolidate small, medium-sized companies or a scale-up operation. Just they're not there, or if they are there, they're foreign-owned and they're kind of just less willing to play. So I think this question of ownership matters enormously. I think there's points to make also about two more points to make about the debates, which I was surprised by the omission. I mean, I think one of the things that's really hurt British manufacturing over decades is that consistently we have higher cost of capital than our competitors. And actually at the moment, one of the striking features is that the kind of lamentable performance of the UK stock market over the last 20 years relative to other G7 stock markets means that, the kind of earning streams are just not being valued as highly as earning streams in German, French, Japanese, American, Italian companies. And that kind of makes the cost of capital that much higher for kind of all the players in the supply chain. And that's been something which I've been kind of trying to wring the tocsin about for 25 years. It's sort of at the state we're in, drawing attention to it. So I think that's a really kind of important element in this. There's more to be said, but my profound concern about British manufacturing is that it stands and falls as a whole, and that there are areas which are strong: defence, pharmaceuticals, some areas in high tech, but actually there's too many gaps. And actually, as the whole thing hangs together as a whole, those gaps become kind of weaknesses, really, because one simply can't put together the consortia in the UK to do things. I'm really hoping, for example, I've just had the privilege, and I'll stop now, Vincent de Riva, who ran EDF Energy and has been behind Hinkley Point, and actually to the attempt to kind of animate the British nuclear industry. Vince will remember all of that. He's written a kind of a personal memoir about his experience of the UK. And he makes the point, as kind of leading an energy company, that actually whilst he was CEO of EDF Energy in the UK, in all the people who were kind of heads of other UK energy companies, the turnover was just astonishing. 3, 4, 5 CEOs, and the inability to get any kind of coordinated approach about what British energy policy should be was just extraordinary. And today we've had the publication of energy strategy, which I think is generally felt would have been a fantastic opportunity for this component of British manufacturing, at least, to be given an enormous shot in the arm. And once again, you're just struck by kind of all the weaknesses. We don't have kind of enough competence in nuclear industry if we want to be part of our energy strategy going forward. Wind farms, there's not enough UK manufacturers of wind farms. The cost of capital, as I've referred to, is too high. And, you know, we've just, I think, got to have, there was that wonderful period between 2008-9 when Peter Mandelson was Secretary of State, and then when Vince became Secretary of State, where there was 4, 5 or 6 years where it did look as though we were going to get our act together, and it's been shredded. And one again, what should be kind of on it, it's been shredded. Vince is kind of a great, lovely man and very polite, but I mean, it's absurd that actually Kwasi Kwarteng trying to kind of get kind of earn brownie points with Tory backbenchers should have kind of abolished our industrial strategy and the Productivity Council, and the plan for growth is a shadow of what Vince was trying to do. So I'm sorry. I always think the British manufacturers do bloody well, but with their backs against the wall, and too many parts of the ecosystem kind of lean against them. You ask me a question, I'll give you a long answer. I'll stop.
Well, thank you. That was loud and clear. Will, thank you very much indeed. Katherine Bennett, I'm going to put you on the spot now, coming after what Will said. It might put you in a difficult position. I hope not. But I mean, you're right there in the front line at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult.
One of the delivering best, very good Catapult, by the way.
and so say all of us. And you're there charged with, you know, being the bridge between academia and industry, delivering research and into advanced manufacturing. What Will was saying was a little bit depressing and worrying. What is your view, sitting where you are, about how we're going to fill the gaps that Will was talking about? Can they be filled?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Nick, and to Make UK for the invitation to join this. I did listen into the 2 other debates and agree with you. The Minister was very optimistic and Jonathan Reynolds was very realistic. And Verity, I agreed with many of your points you made as well. Thank you, Sir Vince, for setting up the catapults. My previous employer, you may remember, Vince, I was at Airbus. And, you know, I used to see the way that Airbus's HQ would view the UK as a decision-making point in terms of investment. So what Will said chimes very well with me, because I used to work in Airbus's head office in Toulouse, and I used to see the way the French and German and Spanish governments, Singapore governments, Malaysian governments all approached Airbus in terms of investment. But what I would say is the industrial strategy policy from 10 years ago really did put the country on the map, and I know other countries try to emulate us. And maybe what I would say in answer to your question, Nick, is actually the Aerospace Growth Partnership, the Automotive Council, which Vince mentioned, are still in existence. Kwasi Kwarteng has kept the letters I and S at the end of the name of his government department. So maybe there's a faint glimmer of hope that there is still some kind of industrial strategy. I know what Will says, that maybe he was appealing to some members of his party, but some of these organisations are still in existence. With respect to the catapults, some of you may know we were set up 10 years ago, and there's now 9 catapults. The one I have the honour of now leading is certainly has the bigger footprint in terms of centres, and we certainly tick the levelling up box. And we do have to spend a lot of our time, and we'll know this as a board member of SATAP's Catapult, persuading the government we do continue to be a good thing. One of the things we say to BEIS all the time is, please, no more reviews. Let us just get on with what we're good at. I try and endeavour to wear my business pair of glasses with respect to the leadership of the Catapult. We have an amazing track record, over 22,000 companies we've supported over the last 10 years. But absolutely, there are some challenges, and they've been touched on by other commentators just now. The supply chain situation post-Brexit. Brexit's also had an impact on employees who have chosen to go back, if they're from the EU, go back to UK, EU countries. Cost increases, I know this is debated in the other 2 sessions you had. energy prices. But one of the things that we're here for is, as you said, Nick, to help bridge the gap, to help convene, working with people like Tim at IFM, and really incredibly important partner for us. We are a national asset, and thank goodness the country did invest in the assets in our centres around our world-leading universities. And just one final thing I would say, literally today, I had a meeting with a potential inward investor from outside the UK. He was somewhat confused and flummoxed about to whom he should turn if he wanted to invest in this country. And I found myself endeavouring to signpost him as much as I can. I know Make UK also help with that, and there are many other organisations, but it is confusing. The R&D landscape is confusing. Final thing, Horizon Europe. I don't know whether you want to talk about that, Nick, and I know that Verity's done a lot of work on this too, but we really need Horizon Europe sorted out, because otherwise we are just going to be the island that floats away into the mid-Atlantic.
Yes, well, I'm afraid to say I'm not up to speed with Horizon Europe. Verity, have you got any thoughts on that?
I think that we're probably working alongside Katherine and her team to make sure that we were never going to lose kind of the Horizon 2020 and that close relationship that we have. I think we're hearing all the right noises. It's just making sure that that turns into kind of action and implementation. And I think as a collective, all the people on this call, when we're talking about innovation, then we need to be also talking about Horizon Europe and how important it is. I think as soon as we, as advocates, as soon as we start talking about how great something is, as Katherine alluded to, there's either a review or not even a review, there's just an outright scrapping. So, I think if we've got companies that are utilising it, if we've got organisations that rely on it, it's really important that we're continuing to talk about it, because as you say, Nick, not everyone knows about it, but they might actually access it indirectly, and when it's gone, that's when we have a problem.
In science, Mr. George Freeman is very committed to Britain's participation in it, and in fairness, in the spending review, there was an allocation made by Rishi Sunak for our membership of Horizon. But my sources in Brussels are very clear and explicit, both on and off the record, that the EU has actually made a kind of high-level decision that we will not be a member of Horizon the next, until and unless the Northern Ireland Protocol is honoured. Elizabeth Truss knows that, and I've noticed with interest that she's been making positive noises about the European Union in the wake of Ukraine. She even attended a foreign ministers' council meeting, although she didn't include it on her Instagram account, I noted. But it's a bit like the failure today to have a kind of clear, was an opportunity to have a fantastic kind of energy strategy that would have fed into repurposing and kind of re-energizing parts of the manufacturing base devoted to kind of manufacturing in energy and energy-related fields. But there are 80, 90, 100 Tory MPs who are kind of excessively NIMBYist. There are a similar number who are in the kind of, as we know, the profoundly Eurosceptic, and they actually tie the hands of the governing party. It means that you can't do something sensible about the Northern Ireland Protocol for fear that you'll get shot down by the kind of profound anti-Europeans on the Conservative backbenches and the constituencies, the associations which represent them. And I kind of really worry that we become a kind of too many. Those of us who are in the working population and vote don't vote for this kind of perspective. the over 65s are the Tories' base and dominate many constituency associations and make it impossible for the MPs to do kind of the right things, and that reflects itself in public policy. And you see it, we saw it today in the energy strategy, and we're seeing it in the nobody wants to be, Elizabeth Truss does not want to be the Foreign Secretary who did a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol, opening up membership of Horizon for fear of what might happen to her leadership chances, because everyone knows that Boris Johnson is not going to lead the Conservative Party into the next general election. And she and Ben Wallace are shaping up to a battle royal over that. And that dominates everything. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm speaking out of turn.
That's okay.
But it's a conversation, and I think and I think that we should all share, our concerns. I would like British manufacturing to be, 15-20% of UK GDP and not 9%. And to get to that place requires all of us who want that outcome to kind of speak with one voice, or at least have a shared sense of general direction. If we don't speak as kind of identical people, but there's a spectrum of opinion within a kind of a generally held view about what we need to do.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Will, and I think that's actually partly what drives the reason why we have these conversations on a monthly basis, and indeed why we wanted to have those debates. I was extremely struck by the different approaches to the question about commitment to have cross-party, broad consensus on industrial, non-controversial industrial strategies that would allow for long-term planning and thinking. And Jonathan Reynolds said we'd absolutely go for that. Lee Rowley said, it'd be nice, we all will love the idea of long-term strategies, but unfortunately politics doesn't work like that. And what he was essentially saying was we've got to have the right to walk in and rip up the previous party's governmental strategies. And I certainly found that depressing. Verity, I know that you Make UK very strongly urges long-term strategies, and it is almost impossible. And we complain deeply and regularly about the fact that life is so uncertain. I want to move on to a couple of other things. And I notice a lot of people have got their cameras off. Don't be shy, join in, because we've got quite a few people. There we are, people are coming on board, terrific. And also, please join in the conversation. Now, just use the raise your hand device, and that's the way to do it. And Tim has raised his hand. Thank you, Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. I just wanted to pick up on some of the great points Will made there. This issue of what's the phrase that's used? The avoidance of manufacturing fetishism. This idea that we don't just go, we want it to be bigger. It must be bigger. So it would be good if it was bigger, rather than us having the debate about why it's so important that it's bigger. Yep. I think sometimes that gets a little lost, that we end up, or there is a risk that our voices you would say that, you're from manufacturing organizations. So I don't know, Will, any comment on how we avoid that bit, where we just go, yes, these manufacturing people talk about manufacturing is important, rather than these are the important things the economy needs, and there is strong evidence to say that a strong manufacturing base supports those positive outcomes for an economy.
Well, I mean, you can't do levelling up without one of the great things about manufacturing is that you can do it in the Midlands, you can do it in the Northwest and Northeast, you can do it in Yorkshire and Humberside. I mean, and I have this kind of, one of the nice things about that, I really like the Levelling Up white paper, actually, which chapters 1 and 2, if you haven't, those of you who haven't read chapters 1 and 2 of the Levelling Up white paper, I do recommend you do. Michael Gove is an effective minister. Andy Haldane is a friend of mine, and a good guy. And Neil O'Brien, who's the Minister of State, is like one of the better Conservatives. And Danny Kruger, who's, I mean, the four of them are excellent. And actually what they tried to do was formidable. And they opened up this, they kind of opened this notion, you know, why couldn't the whole of the east of England, from, you know, the Tyne Valley right down to the Humber, kind of with Britain committing to net zero, you know, you could actually have that. It could be batteries, it could be hydrogen, it could be wind turbines, it could be, so one of the points about manufacturing and one of the reasons for arguing for it is if you want to bring kind of wealth generation to all parts of the country, one of the most mobile sectors is manufacturing. Secondly, there's a whole piece which and there's a long literature on this which everyone must know. I mean, I don't want to kind of teach a grandmaster. It's also, you know, I don't know, but you know, to kind of take Coles to Newcastle in a discussion like this. But one of the great things about manufacturing is it does permit a different dimension of skill to be deployed, not just the kind of intellectual skills of some of the people on this on the Zoom call, but you know, manual dexterity and kind of physical prowess, you know, which and that tends to be male rather than female. I concede that, but in a world in which you know, there's kind of blue collar men are thinking about you know what's their place in the world. Manufacturing has a kind of provides an answer. So there's, and lastly, I think I think there's I passionately believe in trade. I think there's no economic growth without trade, but you've got to have something to sell. And our merchandise trade deficit, which is now running at close to 6% of GDP, is the highest in the G7, and one of the highest, I think, of any OECD country. And it's been that high actually for kind of close to 15 years. It's unsustainable. The only way you can finance that ultimately, if you don't have a strong invisibles, is by actually, you know, selling off your country. So, you know, if you there are various dimensions on which you have to make the manufacturing case, and actually it is cross-party. I mean, I know the industry minister wants to say he's a low-tax kind of small state conservative, but these points are true for him and, you know, his network as it is for the networks on this call. And I think we have to kind of make these kinds of arguments.
Yeah, well, there's one thing you said in there, and I agree with you, but there's the one thing Laura McBrown said on the Jonathan Reynolds debate, which really struck me and gives an idea, and I wish that we could get this message out as well, about why people are in business, why it's damn tough running an SME manufacturing business. As she said, you know, if I wanted to make money, I'd sell the business and start a gambling app, which I thought was quite funny. But what she said, she feels passionately about, pardon me, is that she really loves the people who work for her. And these are people who would not necessarily make it in the knowledge economy. The manufacturing, as you said, Will, provides them with a real raison d'etre, a lot of satisfaction, and helps them achieve their potential. And she feels so strongly about that. Verity, I'm sure you'll back me up when it's saying that Laura made a huge case. And it just feels like that contribution to localities, to communities, to where people live in this country is not taken on board. It's that extra hidden value behind having small, powerful little companies doing their bit. Nigel, you've got your hand up, please. Welcome, good evening to you.
Good evening, and thank you, Nick. I sit back and watch, and I've been observing for a long time. One of the things that I do on a regular basis, and as you can tell, I'm from South Wales. One of the things I do on a regular basis is go into schools to speak to 14, 15-year-olds about their careers, about their life expectations. And so few of them want to go into manufacturing. So few of them want to go into making things. And it's mainly because all they see on television, all they see on their TikToks and all the other social media platforms they look at is everything is about celebrity. It's about getting something for nothing. And you know, we all run businesses. We know we are the wealth creators. No matter what size we are all wealth creators. And I think something that the politicians should be made aware of is the fact that every time they come up with a new idea to do something, do they ever consider the consequences of their actions? It might look good in the press, it might look good for their voters and everything else, but do they actually consider what the knock-on effect is going to be on any industry that they are bringing in legislation for? And it's like an argument I've had often with politicians in Cardiff Bay. I would like to say that if you want to convince young people to become part of the manufacturing sector, to want to make things, you're going to have to get them at an early age. You know, manufacturers are going to have to send people into schools to talk to them about it. No, there's a program in Wales. It's been running for 20 years. I've been a role model in this program for the 20 years. It's called Big Ideas Wales. It's worth looking it up. And it's about entrepreneurship mostly, but it's encouraging young people to think for themselves, to think of the opportunities that they can create by creating their own businesses. But again, it's got to be something to do with manufacturing. So let's get them into that side of things. Let's stop everyone being pushed down the academic route to have degrees and everything. And let's see if we can take some of the other youngsters and put them through the physical learning of how to do things, like all the apprenticeship systems. Anyway, I don't want to go on too long, but
thank you, Nigel. I mean, it's really interesting. It's really interesting. Again, during the debates, as you'll have noticed, what I find fascinating is exactly what you say. You get big policy announcements, but how does it work on the ground? And you know, the apprentice levy, for instance, Laura was saying, well, the apprentice levy doesn't work because the local college is too small to actually focus their training on what they need, and they're not allowed to spend the money on themselves training up these young people. So there has to be a change to the apprentice levy. So anyway, Sir Vince, you've got your hand up.
Just a couple of points. I mean, first of all, we shouldn't continue to have to make the case for manufacturing, and the empirical evidence is blindingly obvious. It has significantly higher productivity than the rest of the economy, much higher R&D content, and a much higher export content. Obviously, we've got to communicate that, but it, you know, we shouldn't need to persuade ourselves of it. My second point is there's a link between the two issues which Will was talking about, which is the issue of short-termism and the issue of foreign investment, because there are sectors of the rich economy where we've had a very good long-term approach. You know, the car industry is a good example, because we had inward investors from Japan, India, France, Germany, who brought their business culture with them. And where that can happen, you know, inward investment is something we should very much welcome. The big challenge ahead is of course, what attitude we take to Chinese investors, you know, the biggest manufacturing country in the world by a very long way, increasingly sophisticated, large numbers of sectors where they've got the leading companies. We know some Chinese companies have got a bad reputation, sucking out R&D and so on, but others are, you know, just as good as the Japanese and the Germans and the rest. And we should be welcoming them, particularly in greenfield sectors. But the government, in a rather contradictory policy, has put up this hefty screening mechanism, which is designed to keep them out. And there is obviously a contradiction between this, you know, we're willing to accept investment from anywhere, and then making it very clear for geopolitical reasons that the biggest source of potential long-term useful inward investment is effectively barred or substantially restricted. And I think probably the sector should speak up a little bit more about that.
Well, Vince, can I ask you, the sector, and there is no such thing really as the sector per se. I mean, we've got so many voices right across the range, and all these voices are sort of crying for the same thing, which is for government to actually understand even just some very core points that you've just made about the fact that manufacturing adds value, and that's its core function, is to add value, and that's why close to 50% of exports are from the manufacturing sector, compared with 9% of GDP. But any idea how politicians, how we could get that message across to whom? And we have an all-party parliamentary group on manufacturing. They do their stuff. But I'm just wondering why there is this gap of understanding. Can you help us with that?
Well, I'm not sure I can, but I think Will, in his comments, gave I think the best indication that this is something that should grab the imagination of the red wall left behind areas, which is a very powerful lobby group in the Tory party. That somehow or other, the attachment to manufacturing industrial strategy hasn't entered their thinking. And maybe that's where there's a needs for a bit of diplomacy, actually. I mean, it's not from people like me who are persona non grata in that company, but actually going along and engaging with the Red Wall MPs and saying that, our interests are your interests.
Yeah, I mean, Lee Rowley is himself. He's from Northeast Derbyshire, and a lot of manufacturing goes on up there. And he understands that. But again, there is a kind of political thread running through the party, which doesn't allow for that extra step of imagination. Can I call upon some of the other members of the group to jump in, please, if when you want to? I'd like to ask Stephen Barr, put you on the spot, Stephen. You were the victim of one of those changes of government policy when the Manufacturing Advisory Service was scrapped in 2015. What are your thoughts on what you've heard so far?
You're very kind, Nick. I'm nobody's victim here, but it was interesting the timing that Maz was taken away. I was just trying to dream up a question as my blood pressure's been rising through the top of the screen here. And all this talk about lots of good things going on in UK manufacturing. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Catapults, of IFM, of a number of universities, and so on, lots of good things. But the thing we fail to do is, between us, is connect the gaps. We fail to create strong supply chains. We fail to create strong consortia for bidding for contracts around the world. I mean, I've got a construction background, so I've seen that happening. I wonder, what is it that we can do, given that government doesn't do, well, diddly squat for us these days, joining all these things together? What can we do to pull all that together to create a strong economy for ourselves? Because I fear if all we're going to do is ask for government to do things, we're going to be waiting a very, very long time indeed. Does anybody have a view on what we can do for ourselves?
Well, I've got a quick view on that. I mean, it was interesting in the debates that it's almost as if the government, this government or any government should say to itself, well, is any policy that we've got actually working on the ground? I mentioned that earlier about the apprentice levy. There was another brilliant example of it, again from Laura McBrown. They wanted to put solar panels on the top of their factory roof. But of course, the lease they have from the council, as it happens, says that you have to hand the building back in the same condition in which you took it when you started the lease. So they would be putting solar panels on the roof to very willingly pursue efforts towards net zero, et cetera, but then they'd have to take them off and lose all that investment. This kind of bonkers lack of compatibility between joined up thinking, and you're right, joined up actually, Stephen, is really what we should be talking about. It is about joining up so much. Adam, I see you nodding that. You've got something to say on this, I know. Adam Payne.
Yeah, I think for me, Stephen hit the nail on the head for me. Is we spoke about it before previously around how splintered we are from a manufacturing point of view. We have organisations here, there and everywhere. Make UK, we've got representatives here, we've got the Catapults, we've got other federations, but how disjointed are we? We are so disjointed, it's unreal. We are not aligned. And if you were to align all of those federations, all of those organisations into one big ass airy goal, as you were saying, Nick, or whatever you want to call it, around what manufacturing is, you have power, you have strength. Then I would take Steve Murphy's comments around, right, how do we engage the unions? Because unions have power, in particular with politicians. Now, there may be some bridges there that we need to deal with, but again, if we've got that, there is a power again in that as well. So for me, it's around aligning all of it. And I think Stephen, for me, Stephen's hit it on the head. It's what can we do to push it forward, because we know the politicians aren't doing it. And that's my view.
Yeah, I think that was very clear, that, you know, politicians have a habit of saying, or certain politicians have a habit of saying, well, people are just asking for handouts. Why is industry always asking for handouts? And I think they've got a sort of deep-seated cultural national hangover from the 60s and 70s, when industrial strategy was indeed a mess, and people are terrified of it, and they just say, oh no, just stop asking for handouts. It's not asking for handouts, it's asking for a level playing field and clear policy, and as Verity would say, give us the tools, we got on with the job. Vince, you got your hand up.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something. That very good comment from the colleague from Maz. There was partly because I'm probably the most ancient person on the call. I do remember policies from the 1970s, and there were some good elements to them. One of them was that in the 1970s, there was something called the Overseas Project Group, which operated in the Department of Trade. And it was designed to bring together leading British companies to bid in a consortium for big infrastructure projects around the world. Exactly the kind of thing that you were calling for. And it was a success. It effectively involved suspending cartel rules so that British companies could offer joint bids. There was a lot of very effective government acting as a catalyst to do exactly what the big construction companies appear to want. So this kind of stuff gets lost in our history, but we've been there and done it, and it worked very well at the time.
Absolutely fair point. Verity.
Yeah, I was going to just add to, I guess, a couple of the points that were mentioned earlier. That I actually think the government, there's actually some easy wins to be had, and it goes back to almost that long-term, aspect. I was visiting a member company, electronics company, last Friday, and they were telling me they use all of the annual investment allowance. They said that should be increased and extended. They use the super deduction, but of course wouldn't be able to when it ended. They use the R&D tax credit, but they were now nervous because the government's been making a bit of noise about reviewing that, particularly the SME element. So I think it's just, when things work, why don't we keep them going? Why don't we make them more accessible, and why don't we extend them? And I think the other example, and I know we discussed it a lot with Brian and Laura in the debates, is also around Made Smarter. It was one of those things, we've introduced a policy and initiative, we've got proof of concept, we've rolled it out a little bit in certain regions, but not everywhere. And instead, the government decided to introduce the Help to Grow schemes, which the feedback from most of the manufacturers I'm speaking to at the moment is that it doesn't do the job, because it's focused on things like CRM and the PAYE systems, not really actually about helping them digitalize. And instead now that's the government's focus. All the communications and all the funding is based on that. Whereas industry were clearly saying what we wanted was the rollout of Made Smarter. So I just think there are missed opportunities for the government to take their own policies and either expand or extend them, and just stop replacing them with something shiny and new that doesn't actually have time to become embedded before it's then thrown out again.
Well, that's a very good point. It does feel that somebody used the word TikTok earlier, but it's almost like we have a TikTok political culture sometimes, where 30 seconds in the sun and then let's move on to the next policy and not actually make it work. Stephen.
I mean, just to emphasize that really what Vince and Verity are picking up on there is the yawning gap between policy, which is all very fine, but highfalutin, the difference between policy and action, real implementation by government, influence by government, and intervention. I think that seems to be what's disappeared. But we have a government that seems quite open to intervention based on the last couple of years. I just wonder if that spirit could extend into manufacturing. Is that too much to ask for?
Well, I don't know who you're asking the question of. I would suggest no, but rhetorically, yeah, I absolutely agree. I just think that whole point about just knowing what works is absolutely vital, and it just feels like, as you say, that there is that policy. That mismatch between policy and delivery, and not enough focus. If actually people dug down and worked out with manufacturers about all the anomalies and tried to even just ironing them out, we'd save so much. A, we become more productive, and B, we'd save a lot of public money. I mean, that's got to be a win-win. Will, I'm not sure if you had your hand up. You're there in the top left window, and we've got about 4 minutes left. So I'm just wondering if anything has struck you in what you've been hearing in the last few minutes about policy making in particular.
Oh, there's so much to be said. I mean, I'm what can be said in 30 seconds? Let's go. I'm not averse to the fact that there are so many people, on the field as cheerleaders for manufacturing. My instinct is to let 1,000 flowers grow, actually. I mean, the problem is that, and they do all kind of, I want to very much endorse what Vince said when he picked up the point about manufacturing is, R&D intensive, manufacturing has higher levels of productivity, manufacturing has high levels of exports. I mean, all of that, we all know that, and I think holding that in the back of our minds and rolling it out when we need to is vital. I come back to the kinds of things I've been saying, since we're at the state we're in 25 years ago. I mean, that actually British political economy, that's why I like the white paper so much on levelling up, because it was saying, let's go and have, let's reindustrialize around green technologies in the east of England. Let's have globally competitive cities in each English region. Let's, as a country, get behind that on a cross-party basis. And in the slipstream of that, you can see the opportunities for manufacturing. And it kind of, and I know that Gove and Andy Haldane and the people writing that white paper were really we're thinking, can we get a national conversation kind of behind this? And it shouldn't be that uncontroversial that one wants kind of globally competitive cities in each English region and in Scotland and Wales. It shouldn't be kind of particularly difficult for Labour, Lib Dem and Tory politicians to agree that, reindustrializing around net zero is a hell of a good idea. I mean, and doesn't, I keep hoping that we're on the point of a kind of inflection point where there will be a kind of breakthrough. Someone asked, and I'm going to finish on this, what can we do? And I think there's quite a, the kind of ESG movement in, in investment, with £3 trillion now of investment monies kind of committed to environmental, societal and governmental kind of ends by the investment community. There's some really interesting dialogues opening up between the investment world and kind of the best of our quoted companies. And around that, intersecting with some of what we're trying to do in the Catapult movement, I do see kind of possibilities of things happening that are kind of independent of whether there's a plan for growth or industrial strategy or whatever it might be. So I'm kind of, maybe we should direct our conversation to a kind of increasingly interesting investment world, and some of the better of our PLCs who kind of share the kind of passion that's been exhibited in this last kind of hour. I'll stop.
Okay, well, I have to say I'm extraordinarily grateful to all of you for being with us tonight. As you know, I do like to get out on time. And Will, can you name that wine you were drinking again? Because it sounded delicious. And can we find it in our local Tesco?
It's called Verentino. Begins with a V. If you find Italian wine from Liguria with a V, you're buying the right wine. It is delicious.
Okay. Well, as we all know, that 1 minute past 7 is my time. I have a rendezvous with a bottle of Malbec, so I'd better go and look after that. Special guest Vince Cable, Will, Tim, Verity, Katherine. I'm afraid Catherine's gone, but all of you, thank you so much. This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. It's on YouTube. I'm going to, and obviously it'll be there in perpetuity, so to speak. I should probably try and get some clips out of this, because I think we want to encourage this kind of conversation throughout the sector. So much juice in there. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much indeed. Very enlightening. I shall say goodbye now. Thank you all for joining, and hope you have a wonderful evening.